Including South Africa, have signed a framework establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a step towards bringing down trade barriers like import duties across African countries, and it's the largest free trade agreement since the creation of the World Trade Organization. While it's not a reality yet, many economists have been saying that more trade and cooperation will boost all African economies. So just how much activity is there, how much cooperation is there now, and where are investors who believe in the future of Africa putting their money? Well, to discuss, we're joined by Nyonga Fofang, the MD of Bambili Group, which is an Africa-focused private equity firm. He's also director of Standard Chartered Bank in Cameroon. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Fofang.
Thank you for having me.
So you look at projects happening on the African continent and try and figure out what's exciting, what's going to work.
Correct.
What is exciting you right now? What sort of things?
Well, right now we look at what's the biggest thing? Where are we in terms of the demographic curve? I think Africa is one of the growing economies in the world. Demographically, I think 50% of the people are under the age of, say, 45. So in terms of the needs, we have significant energy needs because, you know, the energy consumption per head in any environment tells you the quality of economic growth. So that sector for us gives us an indicator of how a country or the region is growing. So the energy needs of Africa is significant. There's a big deficiency there, of course. I mean, if you look at Nigeria today, it's an amazing country with tremendous opportunity. But one of the big gaps is there's the energy supply. It's not there. South Africa has the same problems. We also, I mean, recently we have been having power outages and all that. So definitely there's a big deficit in terms of the energy supply, which is commensurate with economic growth.
So looking back, did South Africa make a mistake? Should we have been thinking not only about energy supply for South Africa, but I know we do supply to Zimbabwe. Should we have been thinking bigger than that years ago?
Oh, definitely. I think the cycles tend to be longer in the energy space. So if you don't reinvest, the lag time in terms of trying to catch up would hit you on the front end in terms of meeting your demands going forward. So definitely, yes, in terms of being able to meet the demands regionally, our inability to provide sufficient maintenance work or reinvestment potential or investment capital to meet with the deficits affect us right now.
And it's hard to then play catch up.
It definitely had to play catch up.
So looking at Nigeria, looking at what's happening on the rest of the continent, private players here have been saying to Eskom, open up your grid. How open are governments in the rest of Africa to sharing with private equity players?
I think increasingly there's a recognition that there's going to be a private-public sector play in that sector because, as you know, energy for a typical investor is capital incentive, politically sensitive. So it's not an easy sector to focus in. I mean, you tend to require patience capital because the lag time or the return of your investments tend to much longer. Your private equity type guys are looking for short term. And that's not a sector where you do a trading opportunity. Basically, it's patient capital that's required there. So for us to have some kind of momentum there, you need to have a public-private sector, collaboration.
Let's talk about oil. So we know Angola, Nigeria, those were the countries that once were benefiting when the oil price was soaring. Then it all started changing. What's the outlook now for oil in Angola, Nigeria, all the African producing nations?
Well, in the hydrocarbon space, there's still significant demand. There's, some analysts say we're still going to be needing oil for the next 100 years. So big producing countries like Nigeria, Angola are still going to be in play. But the issue now comes in, what's the quality of reinvestment that has taken place during the downturn when the market sort of collapsed after 2008? So those who didn't reinvest, would definitely miss out on the catch-up in terms of the increasing demand going forward. In terms
you mean actually starting with new rigs or new drilling, even when the price was low? Exactly.
So you had, that's where again leadership comes into play, and also investors tend to sit on their hands if they perceive, that there is no momentum in that sector. And oftentimes the offshore area, it requires significant capital. So the deep pocket guys, the Saudi guys have been reinvesting, irrespective of the market cycles, because of their qualitative size, they couldn't afford to do that. Nigeria, I'd say Angola, a bit lagging in that sector. So, they definitely, even though you've had this upswing in price, so not necessarily everybody benefited from it.
That's interesting. So they're not poised now to take advantage as the price goes up again. Or what about Mozambique? I mean, or any of the new players? I remember years ago people were saying Mozambique could become this mecca, attracting oil business people from all over the world along that coastline. And then it all started, the optimism faded very, very quickly.
Well, I think there's a combination of factors in Mozambique. I think there's political and there's also the market reality. The gas pillar, which is basically what Mozambique is all about, the investment horizon is much longer to bring them into market, to get them investment ready, 10 to 15 years. So if you don't sufficiently get the right regulatory environment in place, it's very difficult to get investors who might have been excited to complement the opportunity. And the market doesn't wait. If you take quite a bit to get to that decision-making process where you create an enabling environment. I mean, investors move where it's easy for them to invest, and you miss out on that upswing in terms of the opportunity.
It's interesting what you say. Investors go sort of where the profits can be made. Does that happen anyway? Will it change at all if we start looking at these free trade agreements, more cooperation, more governmental cooperation? Does that make it better for the people on the ground?
Definitely, it helps when you have there's a sort of public-private sector collaboration. Investors like stability. If there is stability, then you have the wherewithal to make good investment choices. So definitely, if there's a collaboration, you'd be able to attract good investment capital towards projects that are viable.
All right, I hope we can chat again in future. So much on the continent is happening. Thank you very much, Nyonga Fofang, the MD of Bambili Group, which is a private equity player on the African continent. Well, African economy